Hi, you've reached episode 2 of the podcast series, The Question of God. Has our civilization outgrown God? My name is Sophie Minerva. I'm a professor of philosophy at NLA University College in Oslo. This podcast series is the result of a pedagogical experiment I conducted last year, and 12 episodes have been made. The recording you are listening to is from cafe conversations I had with poor students about questions related to God during the winter and spring semesters. They represented different positions on the God question. Our starting point was the book Outgrowing God by the well-known atheist Richard Dawkins. In the second session, the topic was the use of words, definitions, and different basic points of view. So let's now join the conversation in the cafe. All right, everyone, thank you. We're back and the recorder is on. This time, we're going to talk about terms and definitions. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates said that every meaningful discussion begins with the definition of words. Last time, we talked about your own positions on the existence of God. And we mentioned that there are only 3 possible basic positions to take on the question of God. That is theism, which is the position that a god or gods exist. Atheism, which is the position that there is no god or gods. And agnosticism, which basically means that you don't know enough to make up your mind between theism and atheism. The word agnostic comes from the Greek agnosis and means not knowing. Thomas?
Right. So it's really like saying yes or no or don't know to the question of God?
Yes, that's right. Now, there are moderate and strict versions of all 3 of those basic positions. For example, a strict agnostic might not only say, I don't know, but also, no one can know. You briefly explained where you all stand on the God question last week, and I noticed that we have 1 monotheist, Astrid, 2 atheists, Thomas and Douglas, and 1 agnostic, Hiromi, in this group. Hiromi asked last time about the difference between atheism and neo-atheism. Several people contributed answers here, and Douglas had the last word, as I recall. He also touched on the concepts of naturalism and scientism. Douglas, could you repeat some of that?
Yeah, okay. So I said that naturalism is the belief that nature is all there is. Naturalism is therefore an atheistic worldview. A naturalist would say there is nothing other than physical substances and forces in the universe. In other words, there is no supernatural, and therefore no divine creator or judge. Our universe was not created by an act of purposeful design, but is the unintended result of natural forces. So there is no inherent, objective, universal meaning or purpose.
Does naturalism entail that everything is essentially meaningless?
Dawkins says we can find meaning in all sorts of human activities.
Yeah, he does say that, Thomas, but he's talking about a wholly subjective feeling of meaning that's in no way a truthful report on the objective, intrinsic value of reality. According to naturalism, reality has no objective value or worth. As Dawkins himself says elsewhere, there is no evil and no good. So, yes, Hiromi, there is a close connection between naturalism and nihilism. Here's something from the atheist philosopher Alex Rosenberg, and I'm quoting, "Is there a God? No, there isn't. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is? What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the purpose of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just pure luck. Is there a soul? Are you kidding me? Is there such a thing as free will? Not a chance. What happens when we die? Everything pretty much carries on as before, except for us. What's the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no moral difference. Life is meaningless, without purpose, without meaning, without moral value. We must acknowledge the fact that nihilism is true. That is my creed." Unquote. And this is my creed as well.
Well, that's really depressing.
Yeah, but depressing things can be true. By the way, Rosenberg also says, if this seems hard to deal with, there's always Prozac.
Oh my God.
Thank you, Douglas. Now, Hiromi, Can you tell us why you describe yourself as a moderate agnostic?
Yes, the strict agnostic believes that it's impossible for anyone to know whether God exists or not. I used to be a strict agnostic, but I'm not anymore.
What made you change your mind?
Well, I thought that if there might be an omnipotent God who can do anything, then it seems like it would be quite possible for God to make his existence known to humans. So the possibility of knowing about God seems to follow logically from the possibility that God might exist. I think this is a possibility any agnostic has to accept by definition.
I see. So, if it is logically possible that God can make his existence known to human beings, then it is inconsistent for an agnostic to say, it is impossible to know if God exists. Am I right?
Yes, correct.
But aren't there also several paradoxes associated with omnipotence? For example, can God do something that is logically impossible? Can God make a square circle? Or create a stone so big that he can't lift it? If not, how can God be omnipotent?
I can say something about that. Even an omnipotent God cannot create a square circle, because it's logically impossible. The idea of a square circle is a contradiction in terms. By the same token, a wholly good God can never do anything fundamentally evil. Both logic and goodness are part of God's being. God cannot be anything other than what he is. God is good and God is logic.
Let me just say that Thomas brings up the topic of paradoxes that we will come back to in a later session. It's about philosophical paradoxes. We will come to what you mentioned, Thomas, but we won't go into it yet. So, Hiromi, what you say is that you think it is possible to find answers?
Yes, I think so. I think it might be possible to find an answer to the question of God. Maybe Dawkins' book and our discussions can help me find out.
You mean find out about the question whether God exists or not? To really believe in God is to go one step further, isn't it?
Yes, that's true, Astrid. But I think coming to believe that God exists would maybe help me also to believe in God. I don't know, but we will see.
Great, but I think we'll take a break there. This is going really well. Let's have a bathroom break and refill our coffees before we continue. We're back, and I want us to go over our three basic concepts a little bit more before we finish today. The positions you can take on the question of God are theism, atheism, and agnosticism. And we've talked about how there are stricter and more moderate versions of these three positions. What I want to do now is to look at some important subsets of these three concepts. We've already talked about how atheism can be divided into, for example, neo-atheism, like Dawkins, and a more classical philosophical atheism, like what Douglas is expressing. Perhaps we could also add ideological atheism, as in Marxism. An atheistic stance on the question of God can be part of worldviews or philosophies such as naturalism, nihilism, or scientism, and even part of religions such as secular humanism and some forms of Buddhism.
Excuse me, Professor Sophie. Atheistic religions, isn't that a contradiction in terms?
No, it's quite possible. The essence of religion is to relate to something beyond oneself, to live within a big picture or narrative or a greater whole that gives a sense of structure or meaning to our lives and experiences. In Buddhism, for example, there is no reference to an almighty creator God, and the religion is therefore considered non-theistic or atheistic. Although there are certain schools of thought within Buddhism that believe in deities. In Norway, we also have secular humanism, which is a form of atheistic religion.
Are you sure, Professor? I mean, would those who believe in secular humanism agree that it is a religion?
They might prefer to call it a philosophy of life and not a religion, but the organization called Human Etisk Forbund here in Norway at least receives state funding as a religious organization. So, by definition, it is a religious organization. So, about subgroups. If we look at theism, what subgroups do we find? Yes, Astrid?
There is monotheism, polytheism, and pantheism.
I've also read about something called panentheism, the belief that nature is part of a deity that also goes beyond or transcends nature.
Good point, Hiromi. And Astrid, you mentioned the three major forms of theism. Can you briefly explain them for us?
Okay. Monotheism is the belief that there is one uncreated God who created everything else, like in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Polytheism is the belief in many gods, like those in ancient Greek or Norse mythology. Pantheism is the belief that the entire universe is an impersonal divine being or force. This can be found in several Eastern religions. Yes, Douglas?
I just wanted to say that deism is also a variation on theism. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of the United States, was a deist.
Good. Can you explain deism for us, Douglas?
It's the belief that there is a deity behind the universe that doesn't get involved in it, a reclusive creator, so to speak.
Goodness, there are so many options. I'm confused.
Yes, I can understand that, Thomas. But remember that there are really only three basic options. I don't think there's an easy way out here. We all have to work through the big questions for ourselves. The unexplored life is hardly worth living, Socrates said. Oh, okay, we'll actually let Socrates have the last word because we have to finish now. Next time, we'll continue with the topic, how can I know what is really real? Thanks for your efforts, everyone. We have to stop here, but I am very happy with this. I look forward to next time. See you then.
Yes, see you.
See you?
Bye.
You have been listening to The Question of God. Has our civilization outgrown God? A 12-episode podcast series from Biocosmos Norway and Damaris Norway. You can find references and resources online. The script by Birger Elliott Benson and Peter S. Williams was adapted from parts of the book Outgrowing God, A Beginner's Guide to Richard Dawkins and the God Debate by Peter S. Williams, who also composed the music. All voices, including mine, were performed using AI. The sound editor was Birger Elliott Benson.